Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Philanthropy and Social Justice Conversation Series. This series will feature conversations with thought leaders and action leaders on the need to reshape the role and tap the potential of philanthropy for social justice in India. I'm Urvi Shriram, and I lead the Centre of Philanthropy for Social Justice at the Indian School of Development Management. The centre seeks to engage with individuals, families, institutions, social purpose organizations, and the communities in need to catalyze effective philanthropy for social change. The centre aims to build and disseminate research on effective philanthropy, design pragmatic tools and learning programs to enhance effectiveness of practitioners, and create partnerships to build a community of philanthropists for systemic change. Given that the philanthropic sector has grown tremendously, not only in size and volume of financial resources, but also in terms of several advancements towards more organized giving and in aspirations of philanthropists for transformational social change, it is the right time to ask some fundamental and understandably some difficult questions. Questions about philanthropy's responsibilities, about social justice, and its role in balancing social, economic, and political power to help in building a just and equitable India. We're very happy to have Ashish Dhawan as our first guest to kickstart this conversation series. Ashish is a leader and philanthropist who we all admire, a venture capitalist by profession. He ran one of India's leading private equity funds, Chris Capital. After 20 years in investment management business, he left that to start the Central Square Foundation, a philanthropic fund focused on providing excellent education to economically disadvantaged families. He's played a major role in starting Ashoka University and also many other organizations, and has been helping in developing new avenues for philanthropy in India. Thank you so much, Ashish, for joining us today. Firstly, just want to ask you, what is it about philanthropy and especially the education sector that drew you to this work? And what is the process for you in terms of deciding how and where to give?
Yeah, so for me, I think the journey into philanthropy happened, when I was younger, when I was in my 20s, I had this idea in my head that I wanted to have a corporate career, I wanted to make money, but I wanted a second career that was outside of the corporate space, working in the social sector. And, I had several role models Gandhiji did something similar. Of course, he's a great person. I'm nobody, but, someone who's a lawyer who then went on to bring about social change. Benjamin Franklin, whose autobiography I read, was a printer and eventually left it to go into public service. So I always thought of public service as a higher calling, making a real difference in society as a much higher calling than, of course, business also is, of course, for good, there's no doubt. So I wanted this second career. I also, needed to accumulate capital. And so the first career was equally important at that stage. Education for me was always very, very close to my heart. I know that it's thanks to good education that I am where I am. It contributed to my success. But also, I know that it's fundamental for societal and economic transformation. Without education, you can't have a healthy democracy, a healthy debate. Without education, you can't necessarily wean away from certain traditional beliefs into modernity. Without education, you can't get a job necessarily in the modern economy or upskill yourself. And the beauty of education is it has effects on so many other areas. We know that a woman who's well educated is likely to also be more healthy as well and take care of the health of her children. So it has effects on other aspects as well. It has effects on cleanliness or other aspects. And it's intergenerational. Once you educate one generation, it then perpetuates, thereafter. So to me, it just felt wrong that more than half our children are being left behind. There's so much inequity, and that inequity, in a sense, is being perpetuated. And that cycle needed to be broken. And so my philanthropy or my work, my life's work, should be focused on improving this aspect as opposed to many other areas that I could have worked on.
Right. And if I were to ask you, how, in your opinion, how effective has philanthropy in general been historically in reducing this inequity and opportunity that you're talking about, and creating real sustainable impact at scale?
Yeah, look, firstly, it's not that I want to undermine philanthropy or the social, anything. I think firstly, we have to realize these are very, very complex societal problems, and fixing education and the inequity there is very, very difficult. It's very challenging. I mean, there are deeper issues sometimes around, caste or religion or that come into play as well. There is discrimination in our society. There is power that sometimes teachers and head teachers have vis-a-vis the parents in the community that gives them a certain position and also creates a lack of accountability at times. So there are deeper societal structures as well that we have to keep in mind that are at play. I think philanthropy, has played some role, at least in initially, if I look at the role of philanthropy, so let's step back. The state, the government spends about 7 lakh crore on education, about 3% of GDP. Now, I know that people keep saying that we need to spend 6%. The truth is that people out of pocket spend another 3%. And so in aggregate, we're spending close to 6%, 5.5% to 6% on education, which is quite a bit. So I don't think it's the money that's the issue in aggregate. India is unique, like many other emerging countries, but unique relative to the developed world or relative to East Asia, in that half our children go to private schools. And they largely go to private schools because the state sector has been failing them. They're escaping government schools, going to private schools. They're sometimes going to private schools because these schools offer English medium of instruction, which state schools haven't. So there are multiple reasons. Now, how do we improve all of this at scale? Is the question I think a lot of philanthropists have been asking. Despite all the work being done by philanthropists, by tens of thousands of NGOs, good NGOs actually, over the last 15 years, we haven't seen much improvement in learning outcomes in school education. One reason has been that we were focused early on massification, making sure that every child was at least getting to school. And I think there we should be proud. India has made a lot of strides. We went from, the British left us with an 18% literacy rate. So getting to the stage where 98% of children go to primary school, 95+% of children go to middle school, I think that is an achievement. And when you achieve that kind of enrollment, obviously there's very little difference between boys and girls or SC, ST and higher castes, etc. So I think we've done a good job on that count, access and equity. I think where we've really done a poor job is learning outcomes, right? And it's a complex production function. So I think philanthropy has earlier been funding nonprofits, often doing sort of work in parallel to the system. So remedial work, trying to see if, kids can quickly learn something, or on the side outside school, or one additional hour to school, do something. These are temporary fixes. They're not sustainable. They're not embedded within the system. And so I think that's been a challenge. Or some philanthropists say, I'll set up my own school. I'm in control. I can do it really well. And that's great, but you can't get scale through that. And often you may not be catering to the lowest segment of society, right? So I think if one has to do this at scale in a sustainable, in an impactful way, one has to work with the public system, work on system reform. And I think that's what philanthropists are coming around to now. I think the Azim Premji Foundation was probably the first one to realize this and actually started working at scale in this area. But many others who started looking at this. So I'm much more hopeful that going forward, philanthropy can play a bigger role than it has in the past. But I think we have to be cognizant of what that role should be. If the government is spending 7 lakh crore, out of which 5 lakh crore is on school education, the rest on higher ed, I think philanthropy's role really is innovation, working with non-profits to find new methods, whether it's pedagogy, curriculum, teacher development, assessment, new tools, new methods, build evidence around what works, what doesn't work, and evidence that's scalable, not high-resourced programs, but light touch resourcing so that it can scale. Philanthropy's role is to work on policy advocacy to bring about change. And philanthropy's role is to provide technical support and policy implementation, to help government implement something, to make markets work better for the private sector. So I think that's the role of philanthropy. If we start getting in and saying we want to replicate the system or create a parallel system, that's not scalable, that's not sustainable. That's at least been my learning over the last decade.
Right, yeah. Even while we're looking at various studies and data and everything, one is realizing exactly what you're saying. There's a lot that philanthropy has done. There's a lot to celebrate, about in the ecosystem, with many advancements and crowdfunding and retail funding and venture philanthropy, etc. But somehow the growth has been in silos. Investments in certain areas are preferred by many over others. Service delivery type interventions are preferred, and the complex areas like human rights, gender equality, environment, and the entrenched issues tend to get behind with not just funding but also attention and focus. So in your view, Ashish, what is really the difference between a traditional mindset, traditional philanthropy, and philanthropy for social justice, or many people call it bolder philanthropy or philanthropy for systemic change? What are some sort of key ingredients that one should think about when we're thinking about really philanthropy dealing with entrenched social challenges in high need areas?
Yeah. So one is, I think, at least for me, I'm very passionate about system reform, because if we look at least in education, it's primarily the bottom half that go to government schools. And I mentioned earlier, 50% go to private schools. It's normally people who have higher income, higher caste who are in private schools. It's not 100% segregated like that, but it is. So in a sense, by working with the government system, you're working with primarily the bottom half and the social. So start there as opposed to start somewhere else, So I feel as a philanthropist, if you focus there, you're automatically focused on the big inequity issue. These are the children being left behind. And within that, what we have to do is, even within the public system, is pull up the bottom half. So if you look at the ASER data, about 70-75% of children fall behind by class 3. Right? They can't do basic maths. They can't read second grade text. By class 5, it's about 55% of children that can't do even the basic stuff that should have learned by class 2, class 3. So it's that bottom half, even within the government system, that's really behind. And I think if we can lift the bottom, we will automatically, there's two ways to achieve results. One is to get the kids who are already doing reasonably well, they're close to grade level, to get them to grade level, do better. Another is to say, I'm going to prioritize the ones who are really falling behind. They're 2-3 years behind already. We may need a certain form of pedagogy, and I believe more structured pedagogy for teachers, given the challenges we deal with, particularly with the bottom half. We may need certain kinds of formative assessment and remedial strategies. So I think one is coming in with the mindset that my goal is really to lift the bottom, not to just improve results. Our goal is to reduce inequity. A second is to really understand the beneficiary as best as possible, understand the societal structures, what the issues are in the community, and how we can't change society. I mean, we're working on education at the end of the day. There's some deeply entrenched issues around discrimination in society that we can't necessarily solve for. But we need to understand them and address them as best as possible, right? So I think that's the approach, at least I feel, is one is focus on, inequity, understand that there are issues, whether it's, as you said, gender discrimination, caste discrimination, there are power structures, and how one can potentially, get around those by involving the broader community, and in a way by shining the spotlight on the bottom half and constantly asking the question through data in terms of what we're doing to ensure that learning outcomes are improving for those kids. I think there is a belief also that many teachers have that all kids are not created equal. I mean, in terms of endowment, right? That they don't have the capability. Many kids just don't have the capability to learn. So I think also, as we do our work, part of it is that behavior change, which is also getting teachers to realize some of the biases that they have and getting them to believe in the beauty of every child and that their role is almost like a higher calling to ensure that every child will succeed. And if they can lift the bottom half, they're in a sense doing God's work. So I think as opposed to making them feel bad that, they've been doing something wrong in the past, making them realize the potential that they have. So I believe we have to I'm not an activist. Different people have different ways of working. Our belief is work with the system, work in a positive manner, and look to bring about behavior change. And ultimately, it needs to a change. There needs to be a change in the classroom transaction, where something has to be done differently, and there needs to be a change in the community. In that, the parent needs to possibly play a slightly different role in terms of encouraging the child, being involved with the child. If we can achieve that, all of the other stuff, because often people focus on governance, changing the curriculum, teacher development. Those are all inputs, those are activities. Right. Ultimately, if the classroom transaction doesn't change, if something at home doesn't change, if the parents' recognition doesn't change, we are not going to bring about change. So I think focusing a lot on who the people are, the ultimate beneficiaries, but also people like, particularly in education, the teachers who play a seminal role, and really understanding what the barriers are there and how one can overcome them is super critical.
Absolutely. So, a lot of what we're talking about and what we're learning, and you practice it in your own philanthropy, is about, philanthropy focusing on addressing the root causes, and it will only happen if we speak to, engage with, and listen to the communities and the people who are closest to the challenges and best positioned to know what the solutions really are. So do you think, I know you're doing it, but how do you think this is something which can be encouraged or seeded more broadly in the Indian philanthropic ecosystem?
I think one is to do the kind of thing you are doing, which is to have more conversations and get the word out so that people, honestly, I didn't know this coming in, and it's only later that I appreciated that the social justice angle to this. And I've seen how Ford Foundation globally transitioned its work to work on this, and why this is so critical, because in any area you work in, you often bump into really this issue, that the issues around inequity are much deeper in our society, right? So I think one is that recognition that philanthropists should have. Two is, I think, the respect or the humility to say that, look, none of us have the smarts to figure this out. They're very complex problems. And two, we have to always be learning. We have to learn from the nonprofits who have done good work over a period of time. Many of them have shown stunning results by working with communities. We have to listen to the ultimate beneficiaries and see, and understand their condition, what the challenges are. And we have to look at what the barriers are, and through all the agents who are involved and incorporate that into the work. So that's point number two. A third often is the foundations. I think about, do we want to be an operating foundation? Do we only want to be grant making? I decided we'll be somewhere in between. we don't want to be operating, because I think often when you're a philanthropist, you're not as close to the ground. We live in our own rarefied bubble, right? We don't really interact with the beneficiaries on a regular basis. So by having a set of NGO partners we work with, I think they are much closer to the ground. They have the type of people in a foundation. We typically will not have the type of people. We have more technical people. We may have more people who are good at strategic thinking, good at policy advocacy, at project implementation. But we may not have people who really understand the ground, have worked on the ground, are from the community, from the state, etc. So I've always believed that a healthy partnership, if we start doing everything ourselves, becoming an operating foundation, then you shut out NGOs. But at the same time, if you're just cutting checks, then you're just leaving it to the non-profits to doing the work, which some people believe is right. But I believe there's a layer on top of NGOs that philanthropists or foundations can bring, which is often NGOs are not the best at building the hard evidence, because ultimately there's a conflict there. It's really around their programs that the evidence needs to be built. Or policy advocacy, I think we may be better at it. We may be sometimes better at mobilizing capital that can then be made available to bring the ecosystem. We may be better at bringing the ecosystem together. If it's often competitive between nonprofits. We may be better at coordinating a program and then pulling it together and project managing it, or working closely with the state. We may have better connections with government. So I think that healthy partnership with NGOs is important, because it keeps an ear to the ground. Because I think NGOs are much more connected, have been there much longer, understand the community. So I think that's one way, at least I've realized, because I live in my own bubble. Whatever I may say about doing social work and all, at the end of the day, if I look at who are my friends, who are the people I interact with most of the time, or even in the social sector, I'm mostly interacting with the leaders, not with the field workers to understand what's happening. I'm going out into the field, but it's every so often. I don't live, there. So I think that's another way that I feel. We have to understand what's our core competence, what are we really good at, and who we can partner with. And this space is one where I think there are lots of good people doing good work and different skill sets, and bringing them together, that partnership can really help drive change.
Ashish, now we are seeing this massive intergenerational wealth transfer, and how that's going to lead to a significant increase in philanthropy, and many first-time givers are going to come in and engage in philanthropy. And from what you've just said and what we know about you, you are a problem solver, and that's how you approach philanthropy, not as charity, but with a mindset of seeking solutions to systemic problems, like a justice mindset. So what would be your advice to first-time givers, people in their late 30s, 40s, who are privileged in many ways and are keen to engage in philanthropy?
So firstly, I think they should just remember my motto or slogan is give more, give sooner, give better. So I think the sooner part is important for people in their 30s. Is, often people think that this is something for my later career. I'll do my corporate stuff, and maybe when I'm in my 50s, 60s, I'll do something. I think young people, particularly on these entrepreneurs who've done well, they're so creative and so talented that they should really start in their 30s itself in a small way. I would say pick one issue. Even with 5-10% of their time, they can start to delve into that issue. Start even with some grant making, even if it's not systemic, even if it's not bold initially. Start by making a few grants, getting to understand the ecosystem. Maybe hire 1 or 2 people, so you have some structure around having a foundation. And over the first 3 to 5 years, just start to engage with that one area that you've picked. If somebody picks an area like improving the judicial backlog, say. Let them spend 3 to 5 years reading up, understanding the issue, interacting with organizations that have done work in the area, interacting with, reformers within the judiciary who really want change. And then, I think that initial dipping your toe in the water, because everybody, these people have day jobs, right? They're busy doing things. So I think just getting started in a small way, building some kind of structure even, hiring even one person shows a commitment. Making the first 5 grants, really reading up, the papers, the books, meeting people from that sector that you want to get involved with. I think, and exposure to a few other philanthropists, 3, 4, 5 other people. I think then, what we want is each philanthropist to have their own agency. My sense is that journey over the initial few years, once you start to understand the problem, I think most entrepreneurs will get sucked in because they will understand how complex these problems are. Most entrepreneurs are problem solvers. And they'll want to sort of do more as opposed to just leaving the issue. They'll want to do much more. So I think just giving them a taste of it, getting them to dip their toe in the water when they're young, so do it sooner, will result in them doing more. And in that journey, the better will happen. Because, these are smart people, they'll read, they'll reflect, and over time, they'll even become more strategic with their philanthropy.
So what do you think is the role of research, data and knowledge in driving more effective practices in philanthropy?
Yeah, so I think firstly, one role is to figure out what works, right? I think evidence is very important. We all want to do good work, but so much of philanthropic giving goes into areas where research already shows that you're not going to get results. So I think, or sometimes you're flying blind. You're putting a lot of money when there's no evidence, right? You yourself have belief. So I think having a commitment to research or building evidence is very important. I think the second is building evidence takes time. You start a program, it may take 5 years before you can really build evidence that it works. I think having a mindset, which I think corporate people do, which is that I'm going to collect data in real time and monitor these programs and really monitor with the idea of improvement so I can iterate. And particularly, next-gen entrepreneurs work, with tech platforms, tech companies where there's a digital footprint every second, and they're used to analyzing data. Now, not every segment of the social sector will have as much data. But I think even when you work in education or health, there's the government data. But then around the program, how do you collect much more data, much more frequently? And, in today's world, just giving somebody an app where they can punch in observation data or take a photo and that can be analyzed, all those things are possible. So I think just using the smartphone itself, one can, collect so much data and then use it to iterate and improve program. Also embedding more data into the system itself so that the public system eventually starts to look at data. So as opposed to using it just for yourself, using data also as a public good, and particularly baking it into the public system. So I think research is very critical, data is super critical, but we must not lose sight of sometimes people become too technocratic with their programs. And I think it's good to have a strategic mindset, a technical mindset, but it's equally important to sometimes just stay close to the ground, go and meet real beneficiaries, sometimes even without data. Qualitative is equally important. Anecdotal information sometimes is useful. Talking to 10 real people is sometimes very, very important. Or yourself going and seeing 5 real classrooms is sometimes more precious than looking at reams and reams of data. I know that researchers will say that sample is not relevant, it's too small a sample, but I think there is something about staying connected. So it shouldn't make one aloof. One should still stay. And then the second thing is also, I think data and all is good, but I think you have to realize a lot of stuff is around behavior change here. Of course, we need to look at data as you drive behavior change. But I think if one makes one's programs too and technocratic, you forget about the human beings involved, and that ultimately, I mean, I'll give you the example of education. You can have redesigned the teaching learning material, you can build a great monitoring system, you can train the teachers, you can keep collecting lots of data, you can assess the kids more often, formative assessment, you can do summative assessment, have all that data, have data on observations being made of classrooms, all that's great. But ultimately, the classroom transaction will only change if we look at behavior change of the teachers, we understand the barriers. So sometimes the research needs to be, it's not just data collection, deeper insights into, what will drive behavior change. So a lot of action research also, I think, is important. It's not just measuring the ultimate evidence around whether something works or not. It's also action research, it's monitoring. So I think there's many aspects to this where one can bring in much more rigor without forgetting, I think, the qualitative aspects, whilst the quantitative is very, very important.
What do you think is likely to be the role of Indian philanthropy 10 to 20 years into the future? And how should philanthropy reshape its working to be able to make a significant contribution, even more significant contribution to development? Just some quick thoughts on that.
That's a very big question. I'm not sure I'm qualified to give you the answer to that. But I'll just tell you in my own work or my own thinking, I don't know. Everybody has a slightly different approach. I would say I feel optimistic about the next 10, 20 years. I do feel also philanthropy is, it's relatively, of course, it's age old. People have been doing it for a long time, lots of families. But I think it has gathered a certain momentum, in the recent past. And it'll accelerate even more with all the wealth that's been crystallized in the recent past. I think it'll accelerate even more going forward. So I think in that sense, there will be more of it. I think also people are going to be more engaged with their philanthropy. It's not just that I'm doing this on the side, I'm doing it for some warm glow. I think more and more people are going to want to do this to actually, spend time to take a lot of what they've learned in building their business and bring those skill sets to bear. I think the profile of people, in the foundations, etc., will also change, as we go forward. I think people have the capability to hire some very talented people from other sectors who want to switch over and come into this space. I think a third is that, as you have more people working on these issues, there's a potential for more collaboration as well between philanthropists. And I think there is a 1 + 1 = 11 kind of, or at least 3 kind of equation here. So I think I'm more hopeful that will start to happen. There hasn't been as much of that going forward. I think the government or system, particularly when you work on areas like education, health, is more open. I mean, there are obviously certain areas where the not-for-profit sector is questioning government. There, obviously, a partnership is not as easy. But I think in many of these areas, I think we'll see as more philanthropists get in, there will be more focus on system change. I think the one thing we've been missing is a lot of great work being done by non-profits, right? And sometimes at the scale of a block or district where you can see improvement in learning outcomes. But it doesn't translate into systemic change at the state level. So it's not like that state government is saying, I'm going to take whatever these people have done, hoover it up, absorb it, and make it my own. That translational layer is often missing. And I think foundations can help build that translational layer, where we often see fantastic program and we ask the question, why hasn't it gone to scale? Why hasn't the system picked it up? And really, I think that's where philanthropists can come in and say, we have the connections, we can broker something here, we can help white label this, we can push government, etc. So I think there are many ways in which, people will bring new approaches to the field as well, sometimes using technology, sometimes using other methods. So I just feel that there will be a multiplier effect, more greater focus on data, more research. So I think all of these things should lead to greater change going forward. But I think the point you made earlier, which is that we need to bring a lens of social justice to this. I think focus on that there is inequity in our society. It's very deep-rooted. And I think understanding that and not losing sight of that our role really is to lift the bottom half, I think is something that we must always keep top of mind and something we must keep pushing for.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ashish, for such useful insights and for sharing your perspectives on how philanthropy can be bolder and how it can generate new ideas and really test, new ways of promoting equity and efficiency in our social programs. We hope to have many such robust discussions during the course of the year around a host of interesting topics related to philanthropy for sustainable social change and justice. And we will be seeking interesting ways to answer and ask and answer questions at the cusp of philanthropy, management, and social justice. Thank you so much again, Ashish.